Uh, Hello, my name is Carlis Flores, and our topic is racial discrimination. Some constitutional provisions. One of them would be the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, except for as punishment if someone committed a crime, then they would be incarcerated. Section 2 of the amendment authorizes Congress to enforce prohibition of slavery through appropriate legislation. And it also permits Congress to eliminate the badges and incidents of slavery, which refers to the public widespread private action, any racial group or population. So that would be, just slavery altogether just won't be able to exist at all. If it was the legacy of slavery. Congress passed the 13th Amendment on January 31st, 1865, and ratified on December 6, 1865, after the Civil War. Any person, for the 14th Amendment, any person born or naturalized in the United States or citizens of the United States, and no citizens' privileges shall be taken from them. No state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property. And there's also the Equal Protection Clause. No state will deny any person the equal protection of the laws. Equal protection applies to the due process from the Fifth Amendment. The 14th Amendment also protects the fundamental rights of U.S. citizens, particularly in the civil rights. For the 15th Amendment, it was the last of the post-Civil War era amendments. It was the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. After blacks in the United States exercised their rights to vote in strong numbers down in the South, other people like the Ku Klux Klan and other Southerners imposed restrictive voting qualifications for them. Between 1876 and the mid-1960s, neither Congress nor the federal courts took action to prevent, these things from happening to them. But in 1965, the U.S. Congress enacted the Voting Rights Act, which allowed African Americans to vote without being scrutinized by these certain laws down in the South.
I'm Micahaela, and these are Supreme Court decisions regarding racial discrimination, segregation. The first one I'll be discussing is Brown versus the Board of Education, December 9th of 1952 through May 17th of 1954. During the time that this case ran, a third of all schools in the U.S. were segregated by law. This case started as 5 cases across Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. During this time, the argument against this was that both types of schools were equal in education, but that in fact wasn't true. Schools of color received only 60% of the funding that the southern white schools did obtain. Schools of color even lacked basic necessities from cafeterias, libraries, gymnasiums to running water and electricity. The backlash from this case was plaintiffs lost their jobs. Many plaintiffs also had their credit cut off for just being a part of this case. A very well-known plaintiff, Reverend Joseph A. D. Lane, had his house and church burned down in South Carolina, as well as one night he was shot at, and this caused the Reverend to flee from South Carolina, and he never returned. Judge Waring was forced out of the bench by constant death threats that he received, leading to his retirement in 1952. Outcomes on the case. On May 17th of 1954, the Supreme Court declared that racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. This ultimately affected 21 states that had legally segregated schools. In April of 1955, a whole year later, the Supreme Court ordered desegregation to begin with what they quoted, all deliberate speed. This was not a speedy turn of events. People involved stalled and would come up with excuses, anything they could to make the process slower, because this is just not what they wanted. Another case that I would like to touch upon is the Loving versus Virginia case, which ran from April 10th of 1967 to June 12th of 1967. This case revolves around two individuals that were married in the District of Columbia in 1958. They were residents of Virginia. Their names were Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving. The couple was charged with violating the state's law against interracial marriages. What happened was at approximately around 2 a.m. on July 11th of 1958, a sheriff and his deputies barged into the couple's home, into their bedroom, asking them questions such as, what are you doing in bed together? Who is she? Which Mildred replied with, I'm his wife. And this just wasn't okay because of the law that was instated. The couple was found guilty, which resulted to a year in jail to each individual. They were told if they left and didn't return for 25 years that their sentence would be overturned. But they ultimately just didn't want to do that, which led to the case. The outcomes of this case, it was a unanimous decision, 9-0. The court declared that Virginia violated the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Loving's convictions were overturned. This case ended all legal restrictions on marriages in the U.S. regarding race. The state of Virginia tried to argue that the law was legitimate because it applied equally to both races, which means neither race could date or marry outside of their own race. They found that racial classifications were not subject to a rational purpose under the 14th Amendment. The court rejected this argument. In closing, a quote from Chief Justice Earl Warren was that the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda Bailey, and I'll be talking about legislative, executive orders, and racial discrimination. What is DEIA? According to an article on the White House website on June 25th, 2021, it states that President Biden signed an executive order to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, DEIA, in the federal workforce. This executive order believes that the United States is at its strongest when our nation's public servants reflect the full diversity of the American people. Would you agree with this? Even with decades of progress building a federal workforce that looks like America, the enduring legacies of employment, discrimination, systematic racism, and gender equality are still felt today. There are countless underserved communities that remain underrepresented in the federal workforce, especially in positions of leadership. This executive order establishes an ambitious government-wide initiative that will take a systematic approach to embedding DEIA in federal hiring and employment. The initiative will advance opportunity for communities that have historically faced employment discrimination and professional barriers, including people of color, women, first-generation professionals, immigrants, individuals with disabilities, LGBTQ plus individuals, Americans who live in rural areas, older Americans who face age discrimination when seeking employment, parents and caregivers who face employment barriers, people of faith who require religious accommodations for work, individuals who are formerly incarcerated, and veterans and military spouses. Individuals with prior convictions experience must be supported in accessing employment as they fully re-enter society. The federal government has an important role to play in supporting formerly incarcerated individuals in fully integrating into society and making meaningful contributions to our country. The executive order directs the Office of Personnel Management to assess the barriers that formerly incarcerated individuals face when seeking federal jobs. The executive order also tasks the Office of Personnel Management with considering creating new hiring authorities to expand job opportunities for individuals with past convictions. On his first day in office, President Biden rescinded a ban that prevented federal employees from participating in diversity and sensitivity trainings. Today's executive order builds on that directly all federal agencies to expand the availability of DIA trainings for their workforce so that federal employees are supported in building skill sets to promote respectful and inclusion workplaces and have increased understanding of implicit and unbiased, unconscious biases. These types of trainings equip public servants to best serve the American public and many diverse communities that make America strong. Thank you for your time.
My name is Leonel Lopez, and I'll be talking about legislations and executive orders from the topic of racial discrimination. The first executive order I'll be talking about is Executive Order 10925. John F. Kennedy, on March 6, 1961, signed the Executive Order 10925. The executive order is requiring government contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. This is basically letting minorities be able to have the chance to actually get a job. This all started the President's Committee to talk about the equal employment opportunities. The executive order made enforcement on pushing their responsibilities to carry out these responsibilities, basically making them sure that you gotta make sure these are upheld at all time. The legislation that I'll be talking about is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President John Kennedy was the first one to ask Congress for a comprehensive civil rights bill. But after the Kennedy assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson pressed hard to secure the bill's passage on July 2nd, 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It also strengthened the enforcement of voting rights and desegregation of schools. To this day, it still continues to resonate with us Americans, but still getting expanded and strengthened over the years by Congress. One thing it also did, it also ended the Jim Crow laws, getting rid of the separate but equal status that we had back in the day. The second executive order I'll be talking about is 11246. On September 24, 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued the Executive Order 11246, charged the Secretary of Labor with strong enforcement authority with the responsibility of making sure no discrimination and equal opportunities for minorities no matter race, color, religion, and national origin. All of those efforts also started the Equal Employment Committee. Even to this day, the Executive Order 11246 has further strengthened over the years, remaining one of the major safeguards and protecting rights of the workers.